We almost got rid of the Electoral College, and the man who did it, his name was Birch Bayh. He was a Democratic senator from Indiana, and he was one of the youngest senators at the time. He was only 34 years old. Because of that, they wanted to stick him in one of the most boring subcommittees ever, and it was a subcommittee for constitutional amendments. It was known as the graveyard, a place where amendments go to die. The chair of the subcommittee died, and the guy that was in charge of all the subcommittees wanted to get rid of it because it was costing too much money and it didn't do anything. But Birch said that he would finance it with his own money and his own Senate budget if they kept it. 2 months later, John F. Kennedy dies. He was assassinated. And people all throughout DC were asking the question, what happens if a president becomes disabled to the point where he can't function? See, Kennedy didn't die immediately. So a lot of people were saying in the future, if a president becomes brain dead and can't do his job, what happens next? So Birch came up with the idea of the 25th Amendment. So he took it to the Congress and the Senate, and it passed. LBJ approaches him and is like, you're really good at constitutional amendments. I want to do something to get rid of the faithless electors. A faithless elector is someone who goes against their state's wishes for presidential and federal elections. And there was nothing in the Constitution that stopped someone from doing this. So Birch starts holding meetings, and he realizes that the Electoral College is a big problem. And Birch realizes that with the Electoral College, you can lose the popular vote and still win the presidency.
And when we have an Electoral College system which threatens to elect a man who has fewer votes than his opponent, we tend to erode the confidence in the people of this country, in their president, and in their form of government.
And he realizes that in the future, people are going to refuse the legitimacy of a U.S. president.
Of electing a president who has fewer votes than the fellow he's running against. This has happened 3 times in our history, and it could happen this year, or it could happen 4 years from now.
So he comes up with an amendment, and he goes to the House, and it passes. And then he goes to the Senate, and he hits a roadblock. Southern senators are like, wait a minute, this is going to give black people too much power. Senator James Allen of Alabama even said the Electoral College is the only political power that the South has left. We're keeping it. So around this time, President Nixon gets elected, and Nixon and Birch meet, and Nixon agrees that, hey, we have to do something about the Electoral College, even though Nixon won the Electoral College. But around this time, there was a Supreme Court vacancy, and Nixon nominated a Southern white supremacist to the Supreme Court. But Birch voted against him, and he got other senators to vote against him as well.
Me that if my face was black and Evan's face was black, I said, son, we're going to work through the system. He'd say, Dad, the system's already said what it thinks about us. So the next morning, I got my staff together and I said, come on, we're going to rally the troops. I think we got 25 people who stand up against this guy.
Well, and Nixon wasn't able to get him appointed. And Nixon was pissed off, so much so that he made a list of political enemies, and at the top of his list was Birch Bayh. And the thing is, at the time, 80% of Americans agreed with Birch Bayh that the Electoral College needed to be changed so everyone's vote counted equally. Nixon was impeached and then resigned, and in the 1970s, Jimmy Carter came in, and his first task was the abolition of the Electoral College. And they thought they had the votes, but that was until a group of Jewish and African American leaders from New York and the Northeast got together and joined forces with Southern coalitions to come out in favor of the Electoral College. Their argument was that getting rid of the Electoral College was going to dilute their votes in places where they had a legitimate say, like the Northeast and the Midwest. Jesse Jackson even came out and said, the hands that pick the cotton have now picked the president. Birch continued to push for this issue. That was until one day a group of black and Jewish organizers came to his office. They had an argument, and Birch Bayh said this, allegedly.
And Birch says, I've worked my whole life voting for measures to make you equal to everybody else. And you're sitting in my office telling me that you want your vote to count for more. Get the hell out of here.
In the 80s, Ronald Reagan was elected, and Birch Bayh lost to Dan Quayle, and his political career was over. Birch Bayh died in 2019. He's most known for passing the 25th Amendment, the 26th Amendment, and inventing Title IX for college students.